What was the hardest thing for you about getting a sponsor?
Well, finding the courage to ask for help was definitely the hardest thing.
And how did you get over that?
I came to believe that the suggestions that I had heard in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous were good suggestions. I saw the results of how they worked in people's lives, and I continued to hear that getting a sponsor was an important part of maintaining sobriety.
Today, we're going to talk a little bit more about our experience with sponsors, how to choose a sponsor, and when a sponsor may have timed out.
Real life for real families. Hurts, habits, and hang-ups happen in every family.
Jerry and I are here with tools to help you trust God, clean house, and tell the truth to ramp up the joy in your family.
You have what it takes.
It's time to become sober on purpose
For his purpose.
Hey, hello, and welcome to the Sober on Purpose podcast.
Hi, thanks. Good to be here.
We've alluded to this subject a couple times. We want to talk about sponsors. People who you go to for a more in-depth relationship as you're working through your sobriety program. Do you have a better definition than that?
Maybe. Let me dig it up what I got here from this pamphlet I've been looking at, but why don't you keep going and I'll see what I find.
What we were talking about is a sponsor in the AA terminology is a person that you ask to help you with your sobriety. And you look for somebody who has what you want. That's what I was taught to look for. In Celebrate Recovery, they have two levels of people. They have accountability partners, and these people may be at the same level you are and struggling with either similar things, or they're at the same year in the program, or just like a friend group. You're all kind of in the same spot. Whereas a sponsor, again, in Celebrate Recovery, is somebody who has more years. And in Celebrate Recovery, they've asked that they at least have worked through the 12 steps once, and that they have a faith background. For Celebrate Recovery, it's a Christian faith background, and a strong following after God to be your sponsor. That's not true in AA.
In AA, it's really pretty informal. They try not to make any hard and fast definitions in my experience. What I did find here, that I got this great pamphlet, which I've never read before, but I just started reading. And one of the things is, what is a sponsor for AA? It says the AA booklet defines a sponsor as an alcoholic who has made some progress in the recovery program and shares that experience on a continuous individual basis with another alcoholic who is attempting to attain or maintain sobriety through AA. Historically, when AA was founded, Bill Wilson was an alcoholic who had been able to maintain some clean time, but as he was struggling early on with intense cravings, it occurred to him that what he needed was somebody else to share this with, and that they would both benefit from it. So he found a gentleman, which we affectionately refer to as Dr. Bob, who had been really trying to maintain some time of soberness and was unsuccessful at it. And together they began to share their experience, strength, and hope, and AA was born.
And the first thing, they went out looking for people. That wasn't a group of attraction at that point. They went looking for other drunks, people who were interested, people who were trying to get well by whatever medical means they had then in the 30s, right?
Yeah, that is my understanding. They would go out and would do what they called 12-step calls, where they would just show up at somebody's house where they had heard from a pastoral leadership or maybe a hospital that somebody was struggling medically with alcoholism, and they would bring them the program.
It was a house call.
Yes.
It wasn't like you had to call somewhere or walk through the door anywhere. They came to you, and that tradition continued for a while. We don't see it that much anymore.
No, I've never personally been involved in any 12-step calls, but I've heard of them happening. So it does happen to some extent. But for the most part, now that AA is, and you know, the 12-step process is so mainstream, I think it's rare to see somebody who doesn't know of existing group.
So with the sponsor, you have someone who has what you want. So for me, it was someone who had raised her children, who was still married, who had worked through the process, who believed in God. I did this through my Al-Anon group, who had a strong faith base. And then you have to screw up your courage and ask them if they will commit to be your sponsor.
Yes, that's been my experience as well. It was suggested to me that whoever I chose as a sponsor should be of the same sex, have more clean time than me, have their own sponsor, and have a character trait or multiple character traits that I wanted to have myself.
Or ones that we saw that we could fix because they had fixed them already. So maybe they had started with the poor character trait that we had and had worked through the process.
Oh, I mean positive character traits like confidence or humility or
financial stability.
Yep.
Anger management, depression, managing through depression, those types of things, the character traits. And it's an extremely special relationship because the sponsor and the sponsee are responsible for each other. So it's not just that the sponsor is responsible for you like you would do if you paid a therapist. It is your sponsor can also come to you and say, I'm working through this issue. What do you think?
Yep, that I imagine. I've never really experienced that, but that sounds perfectly reasonable.
The relationship can be very interesting in that what your sponsor will often say to you when you ask them to be your sponsor is, I need to pray about it. And that seems off-putting at the time, but it is the wisest thing for them to do. It is also important that they look at their time frames and the ability they would have to be available to you, because there's nothing worse than the sponsor saying yes and then not having time to be available at all.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's things worse, but that is not an ideal situation. The sponsor takes on in my experience, my sponsors have taken on a tremendous responsibility, but maybe we should get into the motives of why a sponsor would take on a sponsee.
Sure.
So in my experience, a sponsor takes on sponsees or a sponsee for a selfish motive so that they can maintain their own sobriety and their own well-being, and they can be reminded of what it was like for them as they were early in the path.
Yes. So it's to hold on to themselves, to make sure that they are still walking the path that they want to walk. And when do you learn something is when you teach it. And that's part of their role, is to teach what they have learned through the process. And in the beginning, it can be a very intense relationship as you are learning to walk through your own process. And so there need to be some boundaries and guidelines on managing yourself and how you work with your sponsor.
Yeah, I agree. Also been my experience that is the case. My sponsors have normally set down some clear guidelines and boundaries in the very beginning, but particularly in AA, it's not uncommon at all to hear, I can't help you get your family back. I can't help you stay out of jail. What I have experience in, what I can help with, what we can work on together is staying sober, not using, and trying to find some happiness in that process.
And for more than the Al-Anon sponsor, the Celebrate Recovery sponsor, it is about growing in your understanding of what is happening in your life, why you are choosing to put people around you who use substance or use some other behavior to check out, and what are you using to check out? What are you using to mood alter? With Celebrate Recovery, it is often growth in Christianity, growth in your understanding of Jesus that is part of the role of the sponsor, of keep bringing you back to a scriptural basis around your life so that you can work through the issues in your life.
It just occurred to me that really we're talking about the 12th step. Sponsorship is traditionally the 12th step in Alcoholics Anonymous. And we never really went through the other 11 steps, step by step like we did in our
But you can get the video
podcast,
series.
yeah.
You can get the video. It's very campy, but you can get the video series where we go through step by step and talk about each step. That's kind of why we haven't done it on the podcast. And maybe we will at some point. But do you want to read the 12th step?
Sure. So the 12th step where traditional AA goers get the principle of sponsorship from is step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. In AA, it's often said that in order to keep something, we have to give it away. And it's in order to keep our joyousness, our happiness, and our freedom, we have to give it away. And, it's also said that you can't give away anything that you don't have. As counterintuitive as that may sound, you have to practice those principles in your life. And then in an effort to keep them, you got to give them away.
And you can do all this under the cloak of anonymity, but I think I have found it easier to share that I've been practicing this for a while. It has certainly benefited my life. And if there is something that I can offer you, I would really like to do that. Because when you find something that really works for you, whatever that is, a planning calendar or a system or Jesus or something like that, that's one of the most important things to keep it in the front of your mind, is to keep sharing it. That's what's been important for me, is I know how hurt and how alone I felt as I was processing all of this, especially late at night. That's one of the reasons why I started the blog, and that's part of the reason why I started the podcast. Was it takes some information to bring yourself to say, hey, I'm not the only one. There are other folks who are dealing with this, and it's okay to share my hurts, habits, and hangups, and to be the imperfect person. Because all the time we look at the people in the grocery store and think, well, they must be doing okay, and they must be doing okay. You never know. You never know what's underneath. And that's why it's so important. So bring back to the sponsor part, the sponsor is a history holder in large group meetings, in your meetings where you're learning or doing a teaching and Celebrate Recovery. It's not the time to spill everything that's going on in your life, to share all your details. One, there's not time for it. And some of those folks, it may trigger some other issues for them. There's all kinds of things that could happen. But when you have set up this very close, intimate relationship with the sponsor, they begin to learn in detail what is happening in your life.
Yes, hopefully they do. If we're practicing a good program, I think we are able to share with our sponsor some of the deeper things. And that comes in time, particularly if you choose your sponsor to do your 5th step with, which traditionally is very much like a confession. I do want to touch on one thing. Tanya brought up anonymity. And, obviously, in my foundations in sobriety, Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a foundation of anonymity. And I think it's just good policy in all things in life to not, share any people's personal information that may not want it shared. And when in doubt, obviously refrain from sharing. And if you do feel led to share some particular experience of someone else's. You do it in an anonymous fashion. But it was called to my attention years ago that, this might be blown out of proportion to some extent in traditional AA. We gained the principle in AA of anonymity from the 11th tradition. So obviously AA has 12 steps, but it also has 12 traditions that it tries to practice. To read where the 11th tradition, which is where we gain the idea of anonymity, the 11th tradition says, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. So I've heard plenty of people walk into meetings, and when they say, hi, my name is X and I'm alcoholic, they'll say their first and their last names. And that's not by any means uncalled for. It's a personal choice. Obviously, we wouldn't try and share their first and their last names or say, oh, this person was at the meeting last night. However, it is not a personal thing. You give it away, but you always respect it when in doubt. You always maintain someone else's anonymity when in doubt.
The sponsorship relationship gets into the nitty-gritty details. The sponsorship relationship typically knows what's happening in your family, your children, your husband. They know all those little tiny details. They're the ones that help you sort through all the little minutia and help you decide big deal, little deal. What do I need to do here? They're also the people that if you are in danger or in fear or truly having an issue, they will be the ones that you will call. They're not going to fix it. They're going to help you sort it out for yourself.
Yeah, I agree.
And those are the folks that are intimately involved in your life in a way of knowing the bits and pieces that you probably have not shared with very many other people and are even a little overwhelming for the big group. So this is the person that knows you really well. In turn, the sponsor they don't always, but they can offer those details back to you. They can say, well, I hear you. I know that you're afraid of the mortgage not being paid and not having food on the table. Let me share with you some of my experience, hope, and strength of what happened when I had to walk through that. They will often get into some minute details of how they personally walked through it too.
Yep. And in my experience, good sponsors always bring back life's challenges to one of the 12 steps or principles in CR, 8 principles or 12 steps in CR, consistently letting us know that all of the hurdles of life can be managed through one of the 12 steps. It doesn't fix anything, but it can help us manage it or survive it or get through it.
One of the best things that my first sponsor ever said to me, and I called her many times in tears and hysterical to the point where she said, Tanya, slow down. I can't understand you. And I'd have to back up and slow down, is she would say, is this any different than how it has been in the past? And I'd have to pause for a minute and think, no, it isn't. And then she'd say, how have you handled this before? And we'd work through that. And she'd say, how do you want to handle this now? And that became some of my mantra was I would call her and just to lighten the situation because I began to see myself not the center of the universe. I said, if I weren't crazy, how would I handle this? And it lightened the situation between she and I, and we could begin to work through a problem rather than me just retelling all the horrific details of what was happening. The sponsor is not there just to throw a pity party with you and to listen to all your junk.
Not a good one anyway.
Not a good one anyway. Not there just to listen to all your junk because we could spend days in our junk. And that's what I was trying to get out of was how do I stop getting so caught up in my own junk, in my own stinking thinking that I can't process how to get dinner on the table or go to work or manage the children.
Yeah. Good stuff. So let's talk about getting a sponsor. For a sponsor for me was one of the things which was suggested at my first real AA meeting. And by real, I mean when I had actually walked in there looking for help, not just trying to get my girlfriend at the time off my back. So my
girlfriend, now wife.
Yeah, a girlfriend at the time.
Who you ended up marrying.
Right. So not, when I actually went in there knowing that these people, lived happy, joyous, and free lives and had answers to the trials that I had faced, or at least had tools to deal with the trials that I was facing. It was suggested to me right off the bat, get a sponsor, go to meetings, and work the steps. And that was right off the bat. And I guess also was suggested 90 meetings in 90 days. So what are those four things? For me, the hardest thing to conquer was get a sponsor, which meant that I actually had to ask for help, which I don't know about you, but was very difficult for me. So I looked that one right in the eye and I said to myself, I am not leaving this first meeting without a sponsor. And at the end, I walked right up to somebody and I said, hey, will you be my sponsor? And it was difficult, but I did it. And he accepted. And the first thing he said was 90 meetings in 90 days.
And in the Al-Anon rooms and the CR rooms and those rooms where it is not often as critical, I mean, we're not facing jail times a lot of times, or we're not facing institutionalization or death. We often wander around and don't get a sponsor. See, we may be in the rooms for years without working the steps. And I can tell you that does not give you progress. The sponsor is the key to, if you want speedy progress, you need somebody who is really looking at you, helping you hold yourself accountable and helping you to work through the process when it gets tough, because it will get tough. And all of us have blind sides. Even the sponsor will have a blind side, or two or three. And that is the person, like I said, is a history holder. And so how I chose mine was I waited around for a while and didn't get serious for quite a while. For even a couple years, I didn't get serious. And then my life got turned upside down and I got serious about it. And it took, to finish up the work that I needed to do, it probably took the next year, but that person hung in there with me. And the one frustration I had was I didn't have a very regimented sponsor. I had to go and ask and continue to ask for help and for completion. She was about me coming to her. Whereas I have heard there are other sponsors that come and say, you need to take care of this section.
Yeah. My sponsorship experience is more regimented, where they, I know in early sobriety, my sponsor said, okay, you're going to call me every single night at this time. And,
you miss a night.
Yeah. Or I was late or I missed a night. It was not good. And so I guess that's a good segue into, in my experience with sponsorship and sponseeship, is you can fire your sponsor or you can be fired. So doesn't, just because you've taken on a sponsee or you are being sponsored doesn't mean either one. It's a two-way street. Either one can back out if it's not going right or the suggestions are not being adhered to.
Or the personality is just not clicking. As you're getting to know this person through this relationship, and you may have seen them in meeting, you may have spent time with them, you may have thought you enjoyed them, but if it is just not clicking, you can make changes. And I always think firing is such a strong word. You can decide to just depart ways, that this is not working and you need to do something different, or there's somebody else that is a better fit. Sometimes it's timing. Sometimes the sponsor or the sponsee just gets overwhelmed, or somebody's got a day shift and somebody's got a night shift and they can't sync up. There are a billion reasons. There is one problem with sponsor shopping, though. Do you want to talk about that?
I think I know what you're talking about. I had a sponsor once tell me, I don't remember the topic, but, I think he said, I don't have a lot of experience on that. Why don't you ask somebody with more experience? And I proceeded to cast a very wide net looking for answers that appealed to me rather than, the answers that maybe I would want to hear. And he said to me, after we discussed, and I don't recall the topic, but after we discussed it, I do remember him saying, if you cast a wide enough net, you'll hear anything you want to hear. So,
or you'll hear the answer you want to hear is really what he said. You will get, it's not unlike doctor shopping. If you continue to shop through the doctors, you will end up with somebody who will give you what you want at some point. And that's where you need to be honest with yourself. Is they're asking me to do things I don't want to do. Is that out of bounds of either the biblical understanding or the AA understanding? Or is it within the bounds and I'm just saying I'm not ready to be part of this process?
Yeah, in the pamphlet, which I was just reading before we started this recording, it talked about if the sponsor says something that doesn't sound right or doesn't agree with the sponsee, they should really speak up and not just take anything that the sponsor says as gospel. However, hopefully there's been some thought into the choosing of your sponsor, and you would, know that that person isn't likely to say anything harmful.
It is not unlike scriptural understanding. You go to the scripture and you read it. You go to a trusted advisor, your pastor, someone who is an elder in the church, and then you look for agreement between the scripture, your understanding, and their understanding. You're not shopping for an answer. You're looking to come to a conclusion that is in alignment rather than just going out and looking for the answer that suits you the best.
Yeah. And, honestly, morality, I think, is a lot less complicated than we tend to make it in the modern world. In my experience, morality it's not using violence, it's not theft, and it's not treating somebody the way that I would not appreciate being treated. If you got those three things covered, chances are you're good.
And as Jerry said earlier, a sponsor should have a sponsor. They should be attending meetings. They should be inside of the program. If they want to be your sponsor and not be inside of the program, you're kind of in a touch and go situation there, and it may be time for them to say, I can't sponsor anybody. The other thing is, sometimes groups, especially in small towns like ours, run short of sponsors. If a sponsor is overwhelmed, more than 3 people really is way too many, then maybe an accountability partner is what you can do right now. And that's a person who's kind of on the same plane. I had a wonderful accountability partner, and it started very simply. If she just called me one morning and said, "How you doing?" And we just started relying on each other and checking back and forth and just checking in with each other on how we were doing. The situation is happening. Do you have thoughts on how I could handle it? How did you handle the situation? She had a few more years than I did, but we were still on the same plane. It wasn't a sponsor-sponsee relationship.
And maybe it's different with men and women, but, in my experience, men often go without sponsors for extended periods of time. And it's very difficult for us to ask for help, ask for some leadership or direction in our lives. It's a pride thing. And I've seen it done, and I've done it myself where, and let me even back up. In old time AA, it's not uncommon to have one of the old timers walk up to the newcomer and be like, "Okay, I'm your sponsor. Here's what we're doing." And they would,
or they'll call it a temporary sponsor until you decide, until you can figure it out on your own. Oftentimes you can be so lost that somebody will come alongside and say, "Hey, could we have a cup of coffee?" And that's a gentle nudge towards sponsorship.
Yeah. And I have done that, I think, twice, at least once, where I have gone up to somebody and I say, "Hey, do you have a sponsor?" And they'd be like, "No, I'm still thinking about it. I'm not sure if I want to choose this person or that person." I say, "Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Until you figure it out, I'm your sponsor. And I'll be your temporary sponsor until you can get somebody who you can work with on a more permanent basis. And here's what we're going to do to start." And, obviously they have the choice to say, that just doesn't work for me, but I've never had that happen. I think it kind of takes away the tension of having to ask for help.
So the sponsee has responsibility to maintain their part of the relationship, and so does the sponsor. There are courtesy rules, just common courtesy rules. Unless your sponsor says, "Yes, you can call me at 2 a.m. in the morning," probably not a wise idea unless it is a true emergency. Also, it is always wise to pick up the phone if you're in crisis when you call and say, "Do you have a minute to talk?" Either way, because often at work, Jerry would not have a minute, or if I was managing the kids, I wouldn't have a minute. I would get back to you. That's important. This is a relationship you want to honor. But if that person, you're invading that person's space when you call them on the phone. So to have the common courtesy is important. It's one of the first steps in learning how to have healthy boundaries is to set up healthy boundaries with your sponsor.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm interested to hear what our listeners' questions on sponsors and sponsees are. So I definitely want to see some questions, please, on our show notes or our comments, or I don't even know how it works, Tanya.
Well, we get emails. We have our Facebook group. We can get show notes, comments on the show notes over at the Joyous Family blog. All those things can happen. We're interested in sometimes we get so deep into it, we don't remember what it was like in the beginning. It's like if you started skiing at 3, you don't often remember how all that happened. So we would be interested in your questions, because I know this is a deep one and people put off doing this and letting people into your life, but it really is the component that makes the change, is letting this person into your life and to say, I am willing to step out and share what is causing me the deepest, hardest issues.
Yeah. I would say that that's a key component. There's some other really important components in my experience toward achieving any level of clean time, any sense of happiness, any joy, or any real freedom in my life. Obviously, as important as having a sponsor and working the steps was, admitting that I was powerless, turning my will and my life over to the care of God. And yeah, there's probably some other ones. There are definitely other ones, but those, I would say that those two are as important as having a sponsor.
And sponsor relationships can time out. As life moves on, as things change, as people move, and it is a strong suggestion to have a face-to-face sponsor. Just a telephone relationship is often not enough. You need someone in the same town, or at least in a close region, who can actually physically get together with you. That's an important piece with it. And when sponsorship times out, it's time to look for another one. And it isn't about you don't like your sponsor anymore, but life changes happen. And that just means that it's a community of people sharing what they know, trying to achieve a happy, joyous, and free life through this.
Yeah, that's all good stuff, Tanya. Hey, I hope you liked our talk about sponsorship and being a sponsee. If you like what you heard, please do comment, and feel free to join us at our Facebook page, which is
facebook.com/Sober on Purpose. It's a private Facebook group, and we try and keep the conversation going in there. Plus, you can always email me at Tanya, Tanya, at joyousfamily.com, which is the name of our website, the joyousfamily.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and we'd like to know your experience with sponsors.
And on that topic, I recently did a podcast talking about my 8-year sobriety anniversary, and Tanya said that it wasn't any good. So if by popular demand, you guys want to hear that,
you are a stinker.
You can, of course, comment and say, I would really love to hear Jerry's 8-year anniversary story. And Tanya will be forced through coercion to post that.
And the only reason I said it wasn't any good was he was exhausted when he did it.
I do some of my best work like that.
I think so too. All right. Be sure and look us up. Let us know what you think. And we would love some iTunes reviews. It's really simple. You just scroll down, look underneath the available episodes, and you will find a place to review us. You click the stars, give us a few words. It would be fantastic if we had a review from you. We only need 30 for the first quarter. 30 for the first quarter. So if you divided 30 by 3, that'd be 10 each month. 10 this month, 10 next month.
All right.
And 10 in the month of March. Talk soon.